Greetings, good people. Welcome to another attempt to explain things that are pretty complicated and important in a way that is not horrible. On a previous, well, this one, let's just do a title for this one. This video here that we're doing is like Volume 2, IB, Writing Growth. So you got some kind of colored pencils in front of you. You might probably got a blank white piece of paper. You maybe got some highlighters, and we're gonna make this nice and pretty. IB Writing Growth, and this particular one, we got Volume 2 happening, coming at you right now. Volume 2, Verbs. So in Volume 1, which looked something like this, we talked about clarity and complexity, and maybe when I talked about verbs, I talked about those cognitive action verbs that do intellectual work. Maybe you were confused, and you said to yourself, what's up with that? Well, this is what's up with that. In the IB program, basically, what you are assessed on, mostly, at the end of your 2 years of joy and toil, is your ability to write about. So what is the IB really about on its deepest level? You're going to be judged for your ability to write about writing. Maybe you're not sure how to do it. Let's get into it. So I'm going to start by giving you a list of verbs. Verbs are where it's at. Verbs are really important. When I assess student writing, the first thing I look at are the verbs and what are the verbs doing. What kind of verbs are being used and what kind of work are those verbs doing. So the verbs that do the most work, and this is a partial list. I might do another video someday with the rest of them. But this is a partial list of cognitive action verbs. CAVs. And when I state a verb, I put it in the infinitive, and I'll explain why later. So here they come. To reveal. To intensify. To suggest. To diminish. To convey. To establish. Yeah, let's get another column going. To illustrate. To connote, which is an O, C-O-N-N-O-T-E. This is the word connotation as a verb. To connote. To compare. To address. Isn't this exciting? Let me just copy them down. To exhibit. Wait till I tell you where I found these verbs, other than just kicking around in my own mind. Exhibit. To exhibit. To explore. To reflect. To present. To represent. To examine. And to develop. So that's a partial list. You know where I got these things? You want to know, don't you? You're dying to know. I'm going to tell you where I got these particular verbs. I did something that most people don't want to do. I read 5 years of ACT tests and ACT test questions. All of these verbs come from the questions on the reading and the science portion. These are the verbs that are used in the questions. So they're kind of important. They're good to know. It's good to be familiar with these. So I'm going to put a vocabulary word right here. Infinitive. Infinitive. Inside infinitive, you might notice infinite. I'm not saying that's significant. I'm just saying you might notice it in there. So I state these in the infinitive, like as in to, compare. I learned this when I was learning to speak German, is that when you're talking about verbs, if you put them in the infinitive like that, it reminds you that these are very special words. Don't get these, they just deserve special attention, almost reverence, because they do the work. They do the most important work that happens when we're creating analysis. So here, upside down bracket, there we go. I'm going to say that these are the most important feature in analytic writing. The other most important feature, so if I was going to do a quick little diagram for you about like a analytic writing, like how to understand it, a way to understand analytic writing might be that you have basically you're bringing two worlds together. You're bringing a bunch of domain-specific, well, let's just do it like this. So it's like a bunch of domain-specific nouns. And in literary analysis, what are my domain-specific nouns? Well, they're conceptual. You know, they're things like metaphor, simile, imagery, you know, or just that word image. They're things like descriptions of things like diction, descriptions of structure. They are really specific rhetorical strategies like anaphora. So you have those. So these are like your nouns. You draw from a well that is called domain-specific, which basically means it comes from the world of literary analysis. It comes from that world. It's domain-specific to literary analysis. So the domain-specific nouns are kind of like right here. So you got to know those, what they mean. You have to be able to identify those in writing. And then those come together with, this is going to be a little bit, yeah, that's all right. They come together with your cognitive action verbs as you use both of them to talk about meaning in a text, I'll say. So you have to know these and you have to use these. Know these and use these. Know these and use these. So how should you use them? Well, you should use them in the power position. It's kind of silly. Power position, the PP. Power position. So the English language is set up as a subject first, subject verb language. So like an example of a super simple sentence that fits the format of a subject verb language would be I swim is a complete sentence. So to swim is your verb stated as an infinitive. The subject is I. This is a very natural way to speak. It's what you do. It's really hard to switch these up. You just don't do it. You're not going to say swim I and have that be a grammar error. So the power position as in the context of analytical writing, the subject should be things like the novel, the text, you could say, the author. If you're going to have the subject of your sentence be the author, this is really important. It's a convention of the discourse community. So domain-specific nouns, domain-specific language goes hand in hand with something that's called a discourse community. It basically means a bunch of people who are kind of like a family of people. People like me. People who read novels, think about them, and argue about what they mean. Discourse community. And sometimes with language, the discourse community has certain features, rules, that just go with the territory of the community. So if you want to be in the community, you have to sound like you belong, like you're part of the community. One of those is that when you name the author, you only use, first time you use the full name, but after that, last name only. And these are like, well, why is that? How does that fit into the grand scheme of things? It shows that you understand the parameters of the discourse community in which you're participating. That is the easiest way I can say that. Huge concept, discourse community. So you'll talk about the novel, you'll talk about the text, the words. So these are the subjects of your sentences, possible subjects of possible sentences. When you have possible sentences like this, the verb is next. So you want sentences that are built, and now you can see, we can draw from our list up here of the kind of verbs that we use in this second position. Because now I'm talking about sentences, I'm going to make these capitals. The novel compares. That's analysis. I'm analyzing the novel if I'm telling you what the novel compares. Or, well, I'm going to separate these words now with two different highlighters. So get ready, because this is another level of meaning and understanding. Verbs are, verbs are wonderful, but they can be kind of tricky in how they're used. Another indicator that you belong in the discourse community that you're in is that you use verbs the way that they are intended to be used. So I'm going to talk about one area of nuance in these verbs. Compare, let's see. So I'm highlighting verbs that work a certain way. And I'll explain that more once I get them highlighted. Reflect, examine. Have I got examine yet? Examine. Okay. And then present. Okay. It's like I have exhibit twice. Yep. Okay. So these are verbs that would fit with the novel, the text, the author. So kind of like how close are you examining what it is that is your subject? So if you're from the highest, level, if you're furthest away from something, you're calling it a novel, a text. You might be talking about the author in certain moments, so you could say the novel reveals. You could say the text suggests. Some of these verbs up here, they really only work, or they work better, or they work more precisely with smaller chunks of meaning. So some of these you might have as your subject, like the phrase, or the word, or the metaphor. And if you're using smaller chunks, some of these works a little bit, some of them work a little bit better. So in those, and this is like, it's not a 100% clear, cut and dry. This is not mathematics here. So there is a flexibility in how language is always used. So, but the phrase, like a word like connote, you would never say the novel connotes, because connote comes from connotation, and connotation is a very specific, smaller piece of the puzzle. So let's see, these are black. The phrase, the word, the metaphor. Yeah. So I'm going to make these green because they are like, it works a little better, like establish, diminish, definitely, intensify. You wouldn't say like the novel intensifies unless you're talking about a specific piece of the novel, and so you might say the paragraph or the chapter. Illustrates a little bit, could maybe go both ways, but connote is definitely it's more like phrase. Exhibit, it's kind of like that. Represent, you could use represent probably with both. The novel represents something. And develop too. So these two might be a little bit more flexible, but some of them definitely. So you'd say the phrase connotes and then here's your thinking right here. This is your interpretation. The word illustrates, or the word, the selection of words, So in each one of these, you'll be much more refined than simply the word, So the word in your writing might translate into like the way that the author characterizes blank reflects, something like that. So this gets into our second law, which I want to make sure that I get at the very close of this video, as my students are spying on me doing this work, is another rule. So we have the last name rule right here. The other rule of literary analysis, if you're going to be part of that discourse community, is present tense. All right, people, I hope you found that tremendously helpful. It's just the beginning. Verbs. Love them.